Hello and welcome to this T-Level Tactics video for Root Core 1 Business Context of the T-Level Digital Support Services course. And this video, our topic is making changes. And there are going to be some links with the previous video, video 10, proposing changes along the way. So make sure you've watched that one first. So what we're going to do is we're going to first of all identify some elements required for a project plan and what's involved there. We're going to outline some techniques to manage change implementation. And we're going to explain some methods for reinforcing change once it's happened. Now, as always, these videos are not endorsed or sponsored by any education institution or qualification awarding body. And T-Level Tactics videos should not be used as a replacement to any classroom learning you might be receiving, as the discussion and practical activities with peers and your lecturer will help to expand your thinking and comprehension. Instead, these materials are best used as preparation material or revision to reinforce learning. Also, these videos cover the same content and required knowledge for Root Core 1 of the T-Level Digital Business Services course, however, will be more contextualized towards IT support roles. So let's look at project planning first of all. All successful projects start with a well thought out plan. And at a minimum, project plans should feature a list of tasks to complete, resources that are available and the costs for using them, and a timescale for project length. You'll explore more planning techniques in more detail in Root Core 9 planning, but we're going to go over the basics here. So projects can seem overwhelming when starting out, and a good project manager is going to break the project down into smaller, manageable tasks and assign resources to them. This is a similar concept to modularization or decomposition in programming. Think of setting up a desktop computer. To a non-technical user, this could be quite a daunting idea, but we can break it down to multiple steps. For example, we might want to find a suitable location for our desktop computer, either on a desk or the floor. Then we might want to make sure there's suitable space for a monitor on the desk as well. We'll locate and connect a cable from the monitor to the computer. Place a keyboard and mouse on a desk and connect it to the computer via USB. Locate and connect the power cable from the computer to an electrical socket. And potentially find a suitable location for desktop speakers and connect them to the computer as well. Then we can try powering on the computer. Doesn't seem so bad when we break it down like that. So while that was a pretty simple explanation of a computer setup, it does break it down into small, manageable steps, and each step can be completed in sequence. You could potentially look at it and think, well, some of those steps could be completed at the same time as others, if I had some people helping me. So each step of a project will have resources allocated to it. And a resource could be hardware, software, staff, tools, anything that is required to help complete a task. Each resource is also going to have a cost allocated to it. Some will be per item and might be a single purchase, but some may be a recurring cost per use. For instance, staff will cost the project for every hour they're used and can quickly become a large part of project expenses. Here are some example costs of our desktop setup. Now, most of the costs here are single purchases that don't necessarily recur. But the staff time cost will increase depending on the duration of the project or the duration of the installation. And it could potentially take a technician an hour and a half to complete, making their cost £22.50 from their resource cost per hour. Each resource will be allocated to a task, and some resources may be used multiple times, as long as there's enough of that resource to be reused. And it might look a bit like this. We can see we've got our list of tasks from before on the left-hand side, and on the right, we've got our resources used for each task. You can see the technician is being used for every task, and of course some of the other ones are only used once. Now, projects are all going to have a budget and a timescale for completion. And effective planning beforehand is going to help meet those restrictions. But often, projects may have to compromise. And there's something called the project management triangle that can help us to identify where we may need to compromise to ensure the project is completed. It looks a bit like this, and there are 3 elements. Quality at the top, cost on the bottom left, and time on the bottom right. Now, really great projects are going to deliver projects that are of the expected quality, within the expected budget, and on time. But, as I've mentioned, sometimes that doesn't always happen, and in order to make sure the project's delivered, one of those things may be compromised. For example, if you want the project to hit the desired quality in the time given, you may need to spend more money to achieve it, and that can often come in the form of staff working overtime. It could also be that if you want a project to come in on budget, that the quality of the project may be subpar or less than expected in order to do that. So what's the result of this? Well, project managers consider all of these elements and often produce a diagram such as a Gantt chart to present to project teams. And it will clearly indicate where and when tasks should be started and what resources they will use. They can also be used to effectively calculate costs for resources. Now, there are other project planning methods available, but you're going to find out more about those in Root Core 9 planning. Now, here's a look at a Gantt chart. Well, Gantt charts are great because they can be used for any scale of project across any time frame, and it makes it really clear to see what tasks are happening when. On the left-hand side of the diagram, you can see the list of tasks there. And in the middle, we have a set of dates going across, each column being a different day. Each of those coloured rectangles lines up with a task on the left-hand side and goes across a number of days to indicate the duration, the length of time that task will take. Now you'll see that there's, in a couple of instances, cases where the duration of multiple tasks overlaps. For instance, in the middle, there are 3 pink rectangles that stack on top of another. And this is to indicate where those tasks can all be completed at the same time, simultaneously, if you've got enough staff to do it. So that's a bit of a look at some project planning. And if you're a Patreon member, you can download the task sheet from patreon.com/tleveltactics and have a go at the first task. It only takes about 10 minutes for this one. Now, if you're not a Patreon member, well, head over there, get signed up, you get access to all of the task sheets and previous resources that we've used, and you can join in as well. You can pause the video here, get that task sheet, spend 10 minutes on task 1, and then come back and we'll carry on with the second part. So, we're going to look at some techniques to manage change implementation, and this is where we'll come across some links with video 10, Proposing Change. So you may want to have a quick look at that one if you haven't seen it already. So there are multiple elements involved once a project has started. Monitoring progress, maintaining quality of service, business acceptance and compliance, upskilling, communication of outcomes, and post-project reviews. What's involved in all of these? So monitoring progress is essentially project managers who are going to want reports through a change project. They could want regular meetings. And a good example of this is through Scrum project management, which uses daily Scrum meetings, short meetings, to get updates on progress and potential obstacles in the way of the project. It could be real-time reporting of tasks starting, in progress, or ending at any given time. And audit logs of who's working on what element at any one time and changes they've made. Maintaining quality of service is about, well, your frequently used products or services. How can we make sure they're not affected negatively by people using them during that change process? Are your customers and users still going to be able to use the service while you're changing it? Think of how many sales might be missed by Amazon if their website was unavailable to customers while they made a change to their homepage. Business acceptance and compliance is thinking about the kinds of legislation that project managers might need to be aware of when implementing changes. It can also be thinking about different departments in the organization and making sure they're on board with it, that they're aware of what changes are coming. You'll also need to think about, well, what will they need to know to ensure they're using new systems correctly? And will departments and staff need to be aware of any new policies or procedures put in place? Of course, another part of this is making sure that staff are prepared and trained for changes that are coming to products and services they might be using. So, what's the plan for upskilling staff on these changes? When's it going to be done? And what resources are required to complete this? Has staff training been factored into your project plan? And if so, who's going to develop the resources required? Once the change process is complete, how are we going to communicate these outcomes to our stakeholders? How is it going to be communicated to senior management? And after significant change, it would be a good idea to email all stakeholders affected with what changes happened, when, and what those changes now mean for them. It's a fantastic opportunity to highlight the new benefits of the change and a starting point to direct users on how to make use of any new systems and processes. Thinking back to the upskilling part, if that hasn't been factored in, this could be a good point to signpost them to different advice topics available on a company intranet, for instance. And after everything's completed, how are we going to review the success of this project? It's a good idea to have a clear definition of what success means for the project. What are the criteria that we need to meet to call the project a success? What data can we collect that can indicate success and positive impact? Thinking back to previous videos where we've looked at qualitative and quantitative data that we could collect. Okay, so time to take a look at task 2 on the task sheet. This one's going to be a bit longer. It's focused on managing that change process. It's going to take about 20 minutes. So pause the video here, have a look at the task sheet, have a go at task 2, and then come back when you're ready to move on to part 3. So how do we reinforce change? Well, we need to have a plan for that. So what's it going to be? How are you going to reinforce the changes that have been made once it's been completed? How are we going to make sure that staff are using systems and processes correctly? So it's thinking about reinforcement planning, collating and analysing data showing results of change, and that continual monitoring and improvement aspect that we've looked before, thinking back to ITIL. So what kind of KPIs, key performance indicators, can be monitored to ensure benefits of the change are ongoing? Are new staff coming to the organisation being trained correctly on systems and processes? Are systems still meeting needs and requirements of the user? Are good working practices being adhered to? These are things we might want to keep an eye on to make sure that systems and products are being used correctly. We may also want to think about, well, has the correct change been implemented? Now, of course, hindsight is perfect, but we should always reflect and make sure that what we've done has been right and fit for purpose. Service validation could be used by management staff to verify the change operates correctly and as agreed. And service validation is essentially a document that management can sign to say they're happy with the outcome of the change process. That's a good point for you as a project manager to say, okay, well, we've delivered this, the project is over. You could also see if staff and end users are adapting to the new workflow and using new systems as intended. Well, how could you check this? And when you are checking it, if you identify anything, what kinds of issues are preventing them from using new systems as intended? Is that something we need to address and change further? Now, in terms of data, What kinds of data could we collect to indicate success? We've already mentioned qualitative and quantitative data. So in terms of qualitative, well, what are users saying about the change? What feedback can you collect there just by talking to people? Or you could use an online form that they could fill out if you wanted to. What baseline data did you collect before the change to measure performance? And what does that data show now? Those same metrics you were using to measure that baseline, is it showing an improvement now? Or is it actually showing a decrease in productivity? It could be financial data, productivity indicators, or even the number of support tickets sent in to an IT help desk for help with issues. That brings us to the final task, reinforcing. So head back to the task sheet, have a go at the third task. It's going to take a bit longer as always, and then come back when you're ready to finish things off with an exam question. Okay, so in this video we've looked at some elements required for a project plan. We've outlined some techniques to manage the change implementation process, and also explained some methods of reinforcing change as well. Let's have a go at an exam question. Explain why project planning is an important part of the change process and the effect that timescales and budgets can have on it. And there are 4 marks available. Try and spend no more than about 5 minutes writing your answer. That brings this video to an end. In the next video, we're going to be looking more in depth at some business risks, so make sure you're subscribed at youtube.com/@tleveltactics to be notified when that comes available. And if you're not subscribed to the Patreon yet, head to patreon.com/tleveltactics to take a look at all the great benefits that our Patreon members have there and get access to all of those task sheets. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.